The fallout was immediate. The Minister of Education wasted no time in filing a formal complaint against Michael, citing gross misconduct and abuse of power. Within 48 hours, Michael received a suspension letter from the ministry, effective immediately. He was barred from entering the school premises for 3 months, pending a full investigation. At home, Michael's suspension created turmoil. His wife, Ngozi, was furious. "What is this nonsense I'm hearing, Michael?" she demanded, holding up the suspension letter. "You've been suspended for misconduct? What have you done?" Michael tried to deflect. "It's politics, Ngozi. Some people are out to ruin my reputation." Ngozi wasn't convinced. The stress began to take a toll on their marriage, with constant arguments and tension replacing the warmth that once existed in their home. Meanwhile, Michael's absence from Glory Heights fueled speculation among the staff. Although no one knew the full story, many suspected it had something to do with his inappropriate relationships. While her father had forbidden her from having any contact with Michael, Veronica couldn't stay away. She was angry at her father for interfering in her life and believed that her relationship with Michael was genuine. Against her better judgment, she reached out to him. "Michael," she whispered during a late-night phone call, "I can't do this without you. I need you." Michael, despite the mounting pressures in his life, couldn't resist. Her defiance and loyalty to him only deepened his obsession. When his suspension ended, Michael returned to Glory Heights, but he was demoted to the position of the vice principal with renewed caution. With all these recent incidents, Michael resumed his affair with Veronica in secret. This time they were even more careful, meeting only in off-family locations and ensuring they left no traces behind. Months into their resumed affair, Veronica missed her period in September. A trip to the doctor confirmed her suspicions. She was pregnant. The news left her in a state of shock and confusion. She knew Michael had a family and that this would complicate their already tumultuous relationship. That evening, she invited Michael to her apartment to break the news. "Michael," she began hesitantly, "I'm pregnant." Michael's expression hardened. He stood up, pacing the room as he processed her words. "You can't keep it," he said finally, his tone firm. "It'll ruin both of us." Veronica's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm not getting rid of my child, Michael. Don't even think about asking me again." Michael's frustration grew. "Do you know what this will do to me, to us? My wife will leave me, I'll lose my job for good, and your father will never forgive you." "I don't care," Veronica snapped. "This is your child too, Michael, and I won't let you bully me into an abortion." Michael knew Veronica was serious, and for the first time, he felt the weight of his actions closing in on him. As the weeks passed, Veronica began to feel more emboldened. She refused to hide her pregnancy and made it clear that she would expose Michael if he tried to abandon her. "I will tell everyone, Michael," she said during one heated argument. "The teachers, the ministry, even your wife, they'll all know the truth." Michael's fear turned into desperation. He knew Veronica had the power to destroy his life, but he also knew she wasn't bluffing. He tried to reason with her, offering financial support and promises to care for the child, but Veronica refused to back down. "You don't get to walk away from this," she said firmly. "If I go down, I'm taking you with me." Michael's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. His relationship with Veronica was no longer a secret to those closest to him, and the incoming threat of exposure kept him on edge. He began to withdraw from his colleagues and family. Veronica, on the other hand, seemed determined to take control of the situation. She was no longer the naive young woman who had fallen for Michael's charm. She was a mother-to-be, ready to fight for her child's future. But as tensions mounted, it became clear that their actions would have consequences far beyond anything they had anticipated. Michael's world was collapsing, and for the first time he felt powerless. The pregnancy was a ticking time bomb, and Veronica's refusal to abort it pushed him into a state of desperation. His composure was replaced by anxiety, erratic behavior, and the pressure was beginning to affect his judgment. At home, Ngozi, his wife, noticed the changes in him. He was distant, irritable, and often avoided her questions about his suspension and erratic schedule. While she suspected infidelity, she had no concrete evidence, and Michael's evasive answers only deepened her frustration. "I don't know what's going on with you, Michael," she said one night after another heated argument, "but whatever it is, it's tearing this family apart." Michael said nothing, staring blankly at the floor. His mind was consumed by a singular thought: how to eliminate the problem. Michael's first attempt to rid himself of the pregnancy was silent and threatening. He began researching ways to cause miscarriage, looking for methods that wouldn't raise suspicion. One evening, under the guise of reconciliation, he invited Veronica out to dinner at a discreet restaurant in Ikeja. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone unusually soft. "Maybe I've been too harsh. I want to support you, Veronica, for the baby's sake." Veronica raised an eyebrow, skeptical of his sudden change of heart. "You expect me to believe that after everything you've said?" Michael forced a smile. "I mean it. Let's start fresh." During the meal, Michael slipped a small dose of an abortifacient into Veronica's drink, hoping it would cause a miscarriage. But Veronica unknowingly didn't drink the cocktail before switching to water. The plan failed. Days later, Veronica continued to experience normal symptoms of pregnancy, and Michael realized his scheme had been unsuccessful. Frustrated and running out of options, Michael turned to a more aggressive approach. He contacted a group of local cultists, offering them money to intimidate Veronica into leaving him alone. "I just need her scared enough to stay away from me," he told the leader of the group during a secret meeting at a roadside bar. The cultists agreed and began stalking Veronica, showing up outside her apartment late at night and sending her threatening messages. One evening they tried to break into her home, but Veronica's neighbors intervened, calling the police before the situation escalated. Veronica was shaken but unbroken. She reported the incident to her father, who immediately increased security around her apartment. Honorable Adewale, already furious with Michael, vowed to take legal action if his daughter's safety was compromised again. Veronica had endured enough. Determined to make Michael pay for his actions, she began sending anonymous messages to his wife, Ngozi. Using a burner phone, she detailed Michael's affair and included hints about his relationships with other teachers. Ngozi was blindsided when the first message arrived. "Ask your husband about the pregnancy he's hiding," it read. "He's been lying to you for months." At first, Ngozi dismissed it as a prank, but when more messages followed, each containing details only someone close to Michael would know, she couldn't ignore it. One message in particular mentioned Veronica by name, accusing Michael of fathering her child. Enraged, Ngozi confronted Michael late one night, holding her phone up to his face. "Who is sending me these messages, Michael? And who the hell is Veronica?" Michael froze, his mind racing for an excuse. "It's just someone trying to destroy me," he stammered. "You know how people are, they're jealous of my success." Ngozi wasn't convinced. "Don't lie to me, Michael. I'm not stupid." Michael continued denying the truth in all the texts and stormed out of the room, telling his wife not to bring up the topic again. Despite his denials, the damage was done. The messages had planted a seed of doubt in Ngozi's mind, and her trust in Michael was eroding rapidly. As Veronica's due date drew closer, Michael's desperation reached new heights. He tried once more to plead with her, showing up uninvited at her apartment. "Veronica, please," he said, his voice trembling. "You don't understand what this is doing to me. My wife, my career, everything is falling apart." Veronica stood her ground. "That's not my problem, Michael. You made your choices and now you have to live with the consequences." Her defiance only fueled his anger. "You don't know what I'm capable of," he threatened, his voice low. "And neither do you," she shot back, her eyes blazing with determination. "If anything happens to me or this baby, the world will know who's responsible." Michael left her apartment with frustration. He realized that Veronica wasn't the naive young woman he had once manipulated. She was strong, determined, and unafraid to fight back. Michael's schemes had failed at every turn, and his grip on the situation was slipping. His marriage was in shambles, his reputation was tarnished, and Veronica was determined to expose him. The walls were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. But Michael wasn't ready to give up. In his mind, there was still one last card to play, though it would come at a cost he could never have anticipated. The broken peace in the Okonkwo household was at an all-time high. Ngozi had grown increasingly suspicious of Michael, and the anonymous messages about his infidelity were impossible to ignore. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, she confronted him in the living room. "Michael, sit down," she said, her tone ice cold. She held her phone in her hand, scrolling through the barrage of messages she had received over the past weeks. "Who is Veronica Adwale, and why is someone claiming you got her pregnant?" Michael froze, his eyes darting to the phone. He quickly masked his fear and said, "Ngozi, I told you before. Someone is trying to destroy me. These are lies." Ngozi wasn't buying it. "Lies? Then explain why this person knows so much about you, about us." "Michael, I'm not stupid. Is there something you're not telling me?" Michael stood, pacing the room in frustration. "You don't trust me. After all these years, you believe some random messages over me?" Ngozi's voice rose. "Don't turn this around on me, Michael. I have been loyal to you, supported you, and raised our children while you've been out here doing God knows what. So I'll ask you again. Who is Veronica?" Michael clung to his denial, but the tension between them had reached a breaking point. Ngozi's trust was shattered, and for the first time in their marriage, she began considering the possibility of leaving him. Meanwhile, Honorable Adewale had grown increasingly concerned about his daughter's pregnancy. Veronica had managed to keep the identity of the father a secret, but her growing belly made it impossible for her to avoid the subject any longer. One evening, during a family dinner, her father confronted her. "Veronica," he said, his voice firm but calm, "it's time you told me the truth. Who is the father of your child?" Veronica hesitated, her heart pounding. She knew the fallout would be catastrophic, but she also knew she couldn't keep lying. "Michael Okonkwo," she finally admitted. Her father's expression darkened. "The principal? That man who I caught you with? You mean to tell me he's the one responsible for this?" "Yes," Veronica whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "He promised me things, Daddy. He made me believe he cared." Honorable Adewale was livid. "That man will pay for what he's done," he vowed. "He has disrespected our family, abused his position, and ruined your future. I will not let this slide." The priest. The very next day, Honorable Adewale stormed into Glory Heights Secondary School. Michael, already on edge from his troubles at home, was unprepared for the confrontation. "You despicable excuse for a man," Adewale spat, pointing a finger at Michael as he stood in the school's administrative office. "You thought you could toy with my daughter and get away with it?" Michael tried to calm him down. "Sir, please, let's handle this privately." "There's nothing private about this," Adewale interrupted. "You impregnated my daughter while pretending to be a respectable educator. Do you know what this could do to your career, to your family? You're a disgrace." The confrontation was loud enough to attract the attention of other staff members, who gathered outside the office, whispering among themselves. Michael's secret was out, and there was no escaping it. Adewale made good on his threats. He filed a formal complaint with the Ministry of Education, accusing Michael of professional misconduct and abuse of power. The ministry acted swiftly, and Michael was summoned for a disciplinary hearing. During the hearing, Michael was forced to admit to impregnating Veronica. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and the Ministry of Education had no choice but to terminate his employment. He was officially sacked from his position as principal of Glory Heights Secondary School. The news spread like wildfire. Michael's name was splashed across local newspapers and online blogs, with headlines like, "Disgraced Principal Dismissed Over Scandal with Minister's Daughter." His once stellar reputation was destroyed, and his disgrace became the talk of Lagos. Michael's dismissal had devastating consequences for his family. With no job and no source of income, the Okonkwo household began to crumble. Bills piled up, and Michael struggled to provide for his wife and children. Ngozi's catering business, once a side hustle, became the family's primary source of income. But her resentment toward Michael only grew. She blamed him for their financial struggles and the humiliation they faced in their community. "You've ruined us, Michael," she said one evening, tears streaming down her face. "Do you even realize what you've done to this family?" Michael, defeated and ashamed, had no response. He spent most of his days locked in their bedroom, avoiding the stares and whispers of their neighbors. Despite her father's disappointment, Veronica refused to let her pregnancy define her future. She began planning for the arrival of her child, determined to raise the baby on her own terms. "Michael may have failed me," she told her mother one day, "but I won't fail myself or my child." Her strength and resilience became a source of inspiration for those around her, and she began to rebuild her life, leaving Michael to deal with the consequences of his actions. Michael's fall from grace was far from over. As he grappled with the wreckage of his life, new challenges creeped in. Veronica's refusal to stay silent, combined with Honorable Adewale's determination to see justice served, meant that Michael's troubles were far from behind him. For Michael, life after his dismissal was a never-ending nightmare. But if he thought losing his job would end Veronica's demands, he was sorely mistaken. Veronica, now heavily pregnant, was more determined than ever to make him take responsibility. "Michael," her voice was firm, "I won't let you walk away from this. You are the father of this child, and you will support us." Michael sighed, leaning back against the wall of the shabby one-bedroom apartment he had rented after being forced out of his former home. "What do you want from me, Veronica? I've lost everything, my job, my reputation. What else can I give you?" "I don't care about your excuses," she snapped. "This is your child, and I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are if you don't step up." Michael tried to manipulate her as he had done in the past. "You don't understand, Veronica. If you keep pushing, you'll ruin both our lives. Think about your child. Don't you want them to have a peaceful life?" But Veronica wasn't the same woman he had charmed months ago. She had grown stronger, more resolute. "Don't talk to me about peace, Michael. I've seen what your version of peace looks like, and I won't be part of it." At home, the situation was equally dire. Ngozi's catering business was barely enough to sustain their household, and the weight of Michael's betrayal was becoming unbearable. One evening, as she sat at one corner of the room reviewing the day's earnings, she looked across at Michael, who sat silently beside her. His once commanding presence was now replaced by a shadow of the man she had married. "Michael," she said quietly, breaking the silence, "I can't do this anymore." He looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "I can't keep pretending like everything is okay," she continued. "You've humiliated me, destroyed our family's stability, and now I'm left to pick up the pieces while you sit there doing nothing." "I'm trying, Ngozi," he said, his voice weak. "I'll find a way to fix this." But Skaya shook her head. "You've been saying that for months. I need to think about what's best for me and the kids, and honestly, I don't know if staying in this marriage is the answer." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He had always taken Ngozi's loyalty for granted, but now he realized he might lose her for good. Veronica, on the other hand, was thriving despite the challenges she faced. With the support of her father, she moved into a new apartment and began preparing for her baby's arrival. She enrolled in a parenting class and even started working on a blog documenting her journey as a single mother. Her decision inspired those around her. Friends and family rallied to her side, offering encouragement and support. For Veronica, the experience was transformative. She had been a victim of Michael's manipulation, but she had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. During a visit to her father's house, Honorable Adewale commended her strength. "You've made me proud, Veronica," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've taken a difficult situation and turned it into something positive. That's not easy." "Thank you, Daddy," she replied. "I just want to give my child the best life possible. I won't let Michael's mistakes pull us down." As Veronica grew stronger, Michael grew weaker. His attempts to manipulate her had failed, and his relationship with Ngozi was on the brink of collapse. The whispers and judgment from his neighbors added to his misery. Children would point at him on the street, whispering about the disgraced principal, and adults would avoid eye contact, their faces filled with disappointment. Michael began to get depressed. He spent hours drinking cheap gin at a local bar, lamenting his misfortunes to anyone who would listen. But even in his drunken state, he couldn't escape the reality of his actions. The scandal surrounding Michael had far-reaching effects, extending beyond his personal life. Ngozi and their children faced social stigma as well. Parents at their children's school whispered behind their backs, and some even withdrew invitations to birthday parties and events. One day, Amarachi, Michael's 8-year-old daughter, came home crying. "Mummy, why do my friends say my daddy is a bad man?" she asked, her innocent eyes filled with tears. Ngozi held her daughter close, fighting back her own tears. "Your daddy made some mistakes, my dear," she said gently, "but that doesn't mean he doesn't love you." The pain of seeing her children suffer was the final straw for Ngozi. She began consulting a lawyer about the possibility of filing for divorce. One night, as Michael sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, he stared at a photo of his family from happier times. The weight of his actions pressed down on him, suffocating him with regret. "How did I let it come to this?" he whispered to himself. But deep down he knew the answer. His arrogance, greed, and abuse of power had led to his downfall, and now he was paying the price. As Michael's life unraveled, the people he had hurt were beginning to rebuild theirs. Veronica was preparing to welcome her child, Ngozi was contemplating a fresh start, and Michael was left to face the consequences of his actions alone. But with the baby's birth approaching, and Veronica's father still watching closely, Michael's story was far from over. The day Michael dreaded finally arrived. Honorable Adewale summoned him to a meeting at his home, where Veronica, now heavily pregnant, sat beside her father with a look of quiet determination. Michael had hoped for a way out, but there was none. "You have two choices, Michael," Adewale began, his voice cold and commanding. "You marry my daughter and take full responsibility for your child, or I'll ensure you spend the next decade in prison for abuse of power and endangerment." Michael swallowed hard. He knew Adewale had the resources and influence to follow through on his threats. The thought of prison terrified him, but the idea of marrying Veronica felt like a life sentence in its own way. Still, he had no choice. "I'll marry her," he said reluctantly, avoiding Veronica's gaze. The union was far from a celebration. Veronica's father insisted on a quiet court registry wedding with no ceremony, ensuring that Michael's commitment to her was legally binding. For Veronica, the arrangement was less about love and more about ensuring that her child had a father, even if it was a flawed one. Back at home, Michael's decision to take Veronica as his second wife shattered whatever was left of his first marriage. When he broke the news to Ngozi, her reaction was explosive. "You agreed to marry her?" she screamed, her voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "After everything you've done, this is how you repay me?" Michael tried to justify his actions. "I didn't have a choice, Ngozi. Her father gave me an ultimatum." Ngozi's laughter was bitter. "No choice? You had plenty of choices before this mess began. You chose to betray me, to disgrace our family, and now you've chosen to marry another woman. Don't stand there and act like the victim." Her words cut deep, but Michael knew he deserved them. Ngozi filed for separation shortly after, taking their 2 children with her to stay with her family. With Veronica's father's influence, Michael's every move was monitored. Honorable Adewale ensured that Michael was not only accountable for his new wife and child, but also had no opportunity to regain a position of power. "You will take care of Veronica and your child," Adewale said during one of their tense meetings, "but you will never again be in a position where you can exploit or harm others." Michael was given a job as a low-level clerk in a private company owned by one of Adewale's associates. The work was mundane, the pay barely enough to sustain his new household, and the humiliation was constant. His former life as a respected principal felt like a distant memory. One evening, Michael sat alone in the small apartment he now shared with Veronica. She was in the bedroom, resting, while he stared at a blank sheet of paper on the dining table. He had been trying to write a letter to his first wife and children, but the words wouldn't come. As he sat in silence, memories of his past flooded his mind. His early days as a principal, the respect he commanded, and the trust he had so easily thrown away. He thought about the lives he had hurt: Felicia, Chioma, Aisha, Noya Gozi, Veronica. Each name weighed heavily on his conscience. "How did I let it come to this?" he muttered to himself, tears welling up in his eyes. For the first time, Michael truly confronted the reality of his actions. His arrogance, greed, and disregard for others had led him to this point, and there was no one to blame but himself. For Veronica, life with Michael was far from ideal, but she focused on her child, a healthy baby boy she named Victor. She refused to let Michael's presence define her happiness, and instead concentrated on building a stable life for her son. Michael, on the other hand, struggled to adapt to his new reality. The strain of his dual households, the loss of his career, and the constant judgment from those around him left him a shell of the man he once was. While he tried to support Veronica and Victor, his efforts often felt hollow, driven more by obligation than genuine care. The story of Michael Okonkwo became a cautionary tale in the Ikeja community. Parents used his downfall as a lesson for their children, warning them about the dangers of arrogance, infidelity, and abusing positions of power. Michael himself became a symbol of accountability. Though he had lost everything, he served as a reminder that actions have consequences and that no one, no matter how powerful or charismatic, is above reproach. In the end, Michael's story was not one of redemption in the traditional sense. While he acknowledged his mistakes and paid the price for them, the damage he had caused could never be fully undone. His life was a stark reminder of the importance of integrity, respect for others, and the heavy cost of selfishness. The story ends with Michael walking through the streets of Ikeja, carrying groceries for Veronica and Victor. He passes by Glory Heights Secondary School, now under new leadership, and pauses outside the gates. For a moment he watches the students laughing and playing, a pang of regret hitting him hard. He whispers to himself, "I could have done so much good." The train begins to slow down, and David pulls out his watch and discovers it's 7:05. As he walks away, the camera lingers on the school's signboard, a stark contrast to the man who once stood at its helm. The lesson is clear: power, when abused, leads to ruin.